12%. Preston Fox's laughter echoed through his glass-walled corner office like a slap across the face. At your age, Hunter, we need to think about succession planning, not salary increases for legacy employees who resist modern approaches. I'm Hunter Blake, 48 years old, and I'd been director of cloud engineering at TechFlow Solutions for 16 years. 16 years of late nights, weekend emergencies, and building the security systems that kept this company running while Preston climbed the corporate ladder with his Stanford MBA and buzzword presentations. He couldn't stop chuckling as he leaned back in that ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. The wall behind him displayed his collection of innovation awards. Awards for security frameworks I'd designed, threat detection systems I'd built, cloud architectures I'd created while he was learning how to optimize quarterly reports. Hunter, let's be realistic here. The board sees a senior engineer pulling $142,000 when we can hire 2 fresh computer science graduates for that same budget. They've got energy, they understand modern frameworks. They don't need their hands held through every agile sprint. I stood there holding my portfolio of achievements, watching this 35-year-old CEO dismiss everything I'd contributed to building TechFlow from a 60-person startup into a 2,200-employee corporation. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues pretending not to watch while straining to hear every word of my humiliation. Actually, I've been thinking about a dignified transition for you, Preston continued, that artificial tone of concern creeping into his voice. We could create an advisory role, remote consulting position, half your current salary, but flexible schedule. You'd be mentoring our young talent from the comfort of your home office. Think about it. Golf courses are beautiful this time of year. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. The realization that 16 years of loyalty meant absolutely nothing to this company. They saw me as expensive overhead, not the architect of their competitive advantage. I understand, I said quietly, collecting my portfolio. My hands were steadier than I expected as I maintained whatever dignity I had left. Listen, Hunter. Preston's voice shifted to that practiced management tone they teach in leadership seminars. You're good at what you do, but you're expensive. That's just business. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if the nights I'd stayed until 2 a.m. debugging critical systems while he was networking at wine tastings weren't personal. As if missing my daughter's volleyball games and my son's debate tournaments to keep this company operational wasn't personal. I walked back to my workstation. Yeah, workstation. Not even an office after 16 years and a director title. My desk sat wedged between 2 recent graduates who called me sir and asked me to explain basic concepts like why we couldn't just rewrite our entire legacy system over a weekend. Next to my keyboard was a photo from last Christmas. Brooke looking tired, but smiling after her second round of chemotherapy treatments. Sierra, my 20-year-old daughter, home from State University where tuition had just increased 14% for the 3rd consecutive year. Colton, my 18-year-old son, already stressed about college applications and the crushing debt that awaited him. Health insurance premiums were eating 32% of my take-home pay. Brooke's cancer treatments cost us $49,000 out of pocket last year, money we borrowed against the house. Sierra's education was draining our savings faster than I could replenish them. Colton was looking at engineering schools that cost $67,000 annually, and here I was being laughed at for requesting a 12% raise after 16 years of service. Meanwhile, Preston had just purchased his 3rd vacation home, according to the company newsletter, a ski lodge in Whistler to complement his beach house in Malibu and his primary residence in Pacific Heights. The same newsletter that featured his photo accepting an innovation award for the threat detection algorithms I'd designed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook I'd maintained for years. The cover was worn from handling, filled with ideas I'd documented during lunch breaks, weekend thoughts, solutions that occurred to me during my commute. Inside were my personal projects, meticulously documented with dates, development notes, and implementation details. This wasn't company property. This was my intellectual playground. The notebook contained algorithms I'd written on my home computer, security protocols I'd refined in my garage lab on weekends, machine learning models I'd trained using my own hardware, code that TechFlow had implemented without formal acquisition because I'd been too trusting, too eager to be seen as a team player. I flipped through pages, each entry representing nights and weekends spent building the future while my family slept, page after page of innovations that had become the backbone of TechFlow's competitive advantage. I stopped at my notes from March 2022, a series of machine learning algorithms for predictive threat detection that I developed during the pandemic lockdown. At the top of the page, written in my own handwriting, Personal Project, Adaptive Security Framework using Neural Networks, developed on Home System, March 15, 2022. Below it, detailed Git commit logs from my personal GitHub account, time-stamped and documented. What Preston never knew, what TechFlow's legal department had been too careless to investigate, was that I'd never signed over rights to these personal innovations. The standard employment contract I'd signed 16 years ago covered work done during company time using company resources, but my most valuable creations existed in a legal gray area, personal projects developed on my equipment during my time. I pulled up my personal GitHub account, scrolling through repositories I'd created over the years. Hundreds of commits, thousands of lines of code, all time-stamped and documented. The threat detection system that saved TechFlow millions had originated as a weekend project to secure my home network. The cloud optimization framework that earned Preston his latest award, I'd built the core algorithms while experimenting with reducing my personal server costs. Every major breakthrough that TechFlow claimed as intellectual property had started as my personal curiosity, my private tinkering, my unpaid passion for solving complex problems. My computer pinged with an email from HR about the quarterly newsletter. The headline made my stomach turn. TechFlow's revolutionary security platform wins industry recognition. There was Preston's photo again, accepting another award for work that had kept me awake for months. The article quoted him talking about fostering innovation and building breakthrough technology without mentioning a single member of the engineering team. I thought about my father, who'd worked 37 years at the same manufacturing plant before they shipped his job overseas. Loyalty matters, he'd always said. Take care of the company and the company will take care of you. He'd believed that right up until they handed him a pink slip and a pension that evaporated when the company declared bankruptcy. I should have listened to him when he warned me afterward. Companies don't care about loyalty anymore, son. They care about quarterly profits. My mother had echoed the same sentiment, working as a secretary for 40 years at a law firm that replaced her with a computer system when she turned 60. They'd given her a cake and a gold watch, then escorted her out the same day. I'd spent 16 years believing that hard work and dedication would eventually be rewarded. Preston's laughter had shattered that illusion like glass. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I had saved but never used. Mason Crawford, VP of Engineering at Cloud Vault Systems, TechFlow's biggest competitor. We'd connected on LinkedIn 3 years ago after he'd reached out following a tech conference where I'd presented on enterprise security. His messages had been persistent but respectful, always professional. His last LinkedIn message, sent 6 months ago, was still unread. Hunter, I've been following TechFlow's security innovations, and I recognize talent when I see it. The offer stands whenever you're ready for a real conversation. We value experience here, not just enthusiasm. Gray hair means wisdom, not obsolescence. At the time, I'd been flattered, but dismissive. I was loyal to TechFlow. I believed in the mission. I thought Preston, despite his youth and corporate speak, understood my value to the organization. How naive that seemed now. My fingers hovered over the call button. 16 years of corporate conditioning screamed at me to stop, to be reasonable, to not burn bridges. What if this was just a bad day? What if Preston reconsidered? What if I could find a way to work within the system instead of abandoning it? Then I remembered his words. Think about it. Golf courses are beautiful this time of year. The dismissive wave of his hand, the way he talked about me like outdated equipment that needed recycling, the complete lack of respect for everything I'd built for this company. My family deserved better than a father who accepted being undervalued. They deserved someone who fought for what he was worth, who refused to be discarded like obsolete hardware. I pressed call. Mason Crawford speaking. The voice was warm, professional, with none of the artificial corporate enthusiasm I'd grown used to at TechFlow. Real confidence, not the manufactured kind that came from MBA programs. This is Hunter Blake from TechFlow. I think it's time we had that conversation you mentioned. There was a pause, then genuine excitement in his voice. Hunter, I was beginning to think you'd never call. I've been following your work for years. Are you finally ready to explore opportunities where experience is valued? I looked around the open office at the sea of young faces bent over their screens, at the glass-walled offices where managers younger than my children made decisions about systems they didn't understand, at the corner office where Preston was probably already planning how to replace his expensive legacy employee with hungry young talent. "I'm ready," I said. "When can we meet? How about dinner tonight? I know a place in Palo Alto where we can talk without interruption. Say 7 p.m. I checked my calendar. Brooke had her support group meeting tonight. The kids would be at their after-school activities. Perfect timing to start planning my future without TechFlow's involvement. I'll be there." As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not excitement exactly, but purpose. The feeling that I was finally taking control, instead of letting others define my worth. Preston thought I was replaceable. We were about to find out just how wrong he was. 4 hours later, I sat across from Mason Crawford at Steakhouse 85 in Palo Alto, a place that required reservations weeks in advance. He'd made one phone call and gotten us a corner table with privacy. That told me everything I needed to know about CloudVault's influence in Silicon Valley. Mason was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, but sharp-eyed, wearing a casual blazer over jeans. No corporate uniform, no power tie. He looked like someone who'd built systems with his hands before he'd learned to manage budgets. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive. The handshake of someone who didn't need to prove anything. "I've been following your work for years, Hunter," Mason said, studying me over his whiskey. "Or rather, I've been following the sudden leaps in TechFlow's security capabilities that mysteriously coincided with your project, Timelines on LinkedIn. That adaptive threat detection system for the central bank contract. My team tried to reverse engineer the approach for 8 months and couldn't crack it. I felt a knot in my stomach mixed with pride. Someone had actually noticed. Someone understood the technical complexity of what I'd built. How did you know that was mine?" Mason smiled and took a sip of his drink. "Because Preston Fox doesn't have the technical background to understand even the basics of machine learning algorithms, let alone architect them. I've seen him speak at conferences. He's great at buzzwords, terrible at substance. And because innovation doesn't just happen by accident, someone with deep expertise had to build those systems." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Plus, I have contacts throughout the industry. People talk. Your reputation among actual engineers is solid gold, even if management doesn't seem to recognize it. Half the security professionals in Silicon Valley know your work, even if they've never met you." I took a sip of beer, gathering my thoughts. The restaurant buzzed with conversations about IPOs and venture capital, the soundtrack of an industry that worshipped youth and disruption. Here I was, a 48-year-old engineer in a world that thought innovation stopped at 35. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Senior engineering director position, oversight of our entire cloud security division, base salary $365,000, full equity package that'll vest over 4 years and a team of 8 senior engineers. Emphasis on senior. Average age on the team is 46. We believe experience creates better code than enthusiasm." My breath caught. $365,000 was nearly triple my current salary. Enough to pay for Brooke's treatments without touching our retirement savings. Enough to send both kids to engineering school without drowning in debt. Enough to finally stop choosing between financial security and family needs. But more importantly, Mason continued, recognition. Your name on patents, your picture in trade publications, credit for the innovations you create. We're not interested in managers taking credit for engineering work. He paused, studying my expression. "And if you brought your personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed on your own time using your own resources, we have a proper IP acquisition process, fair market compensation for proven technology." Something flickered in Mason's eyes. Understanding. He'd done his homework, knew about the legal gray areas that bigger companies often ignored. CloudVault wasn't just offering me a job. They were offering to properly value intellectual property that TechFlow had taken for granted. I pulled out my leather notebook and placed it on the table between us. I have Git commits and development documentation proving these systems were personal projects. TechFlow implemented them, but they never formally acquired the rights. Mason's eyes widened as he flipped through pages of algorithms, each entry dated and documented. Years of weekend work, personal passion projects that had become the foundation of TechFlow's competitive advantage. This is comprehensive. How much of TechFlow's security infrastructure is based on your personal work? About 65%, I said quietly. The core threat detection algorithms, the cloud optimization frameworks, the automated response systems, all developed on my home lab before the company implemented them. Mason closed the notebook and met my eyes. That's quite an oversight on their legal team's part. Preston doesn't value senior functions, I said, echoing the CEO's dismissive attitude, including legal. Apparently he's too focused on hiring fresh talent to worry about protecting existing assets. We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical details, team structures, and project timelines. Mason understood the complexity of enterprise-scale systems in a way that Preston never had. He asked intelligent questions about scalability, security, trade-offs, and implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone who respected both my experience and my potential. By the time dessert arrived, we'd outlined a transition plan that would bring my personal innovations to Cloud Vault while staying within legal boundaries. Everything documented, everything transparent, everything Preston should have done years ago if he'd valued long-term relationships over short-term savings. 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Preston's desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. Printed on company letterhead, submitted through official channels, following every protocol she claimed to value. Professional to the end, even as I prepared to dismantle everything he thought he owned. He barely looked up from his MacBook, his attention split between emails and a video conference he'd muted, the multitasking that passed for leadership in his generation. 2 weeks' notice. He scanned the letter quickly. Where are you going? I'd considered lying, crafting some story about consulting or early retirement, but truth had more impact and I was done protecting his feelings. Cloud Vault systems. That got his attention. His head snapped up from the screen, eyes narrowing with the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him since that morning's humiliation. Our biggest competitor. That's unfortunate timing. We're in final negotiations with Global Financial to expand our security contract. I know, I said simply. I built the threat detection model that won us that contract. Preston's expression shifted from surprise to something resembling concern, maybe even fear. For the first time, I saw him calculating what my departure might actually cost the company. We should discuss retention options immediately. Perhaps that raise you mentioned, maybe 18% plus a promotion to VP level. The offer was everything I'd wanted that morning, more than I'd dared to ask for. If he'd shown this flexibility 8 hours earlier, none of this would have happened. But some doors once closed can't be reopened with money alone. The offer from Cloud Vault is $365K plus equity, I said, but more importantly, they value experience over age bias. He laughed, but it sounded hollow now. Nothing like the confident dismissal from his office. They're overpaying by at least $120,000. You'll be disappointed when they realize a 48-year-old engineer can't adapt to their development pace. I smiled, feeling that strange new confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. We'll see who's disappointed. My last 2 weeks at TechFlow were surreal. Suddenly, people who'd barely acknowledged me for years wanted to take me to lunch, pick my brain about projects, understand systems they'd ignored. Middle management scrambled to document processes they'd never bothered to learn, realizing too late that institutional knowledge walked out the door with the people who created it. I completed every transition document with professional thoroughness, trained my replacement, a 26-year-old named Landon Hayes who seemed both eager and terrified, and backed up all my personal project documentation. I also made careful copies of every email where I'd shared innovations with the company, creating an evidence trail of TechFlow's failure to properly acquire what they'd freely used. I walked out of TechFlow's glass headquarters for the last time at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday in March. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my new corner office at Cloud Vault, explaining to my team of 8 senior engineers how we were going to revolutionize cloud security. Real engineers with real experience. The oldest was 54, the youngest was 38. People who understood that wisdom and energy weren't mutually exclusive. 6 weeks later, the first implementation of my security framework went live at Cloud Vault. The same algorithms Preston had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now detecting threats 78 hours before they materialized. Processing speeds increased 41%. False positives dropped by 67%. Our sales team had data proving we could outperform TechFlow's best metrics by significant margins. The machine learning models I trained in my garage were predicting attack patterns with 96% accuracy. The threat detection system that had saved TechFlow millions was now saving CloudVault's clients even more, with my name properly credited on every patent filing. For the first time in 16 years, my innovations belonged to me legally and professionally. The morning Global Financial announced they were terminating their contract with TechFlow and switching to CloudVault, my phone started ringing. First call was from a trade publication wanting to interview the architect behind CloudVault's security breakthrough. Second call was from a venture capital firm interested in licensing our threat detection technology. Third call was from Preston. I let it go to voicemail. He called 8 more times over 3 days before leaving a message that I saved for posterity. Hunter, this is Preston. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. TechFlow is prepared to offer substantial compensation for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible. We made a mistake. The admission felt hollow. Too little, too late, motivated by panic rather than recognition. I didn't return the call. 5 days later, Preston was waiting beside my car in the CloudVault parking garage. He looked different, tired, stressed. None of the polished confidence from that morning when he'd laughed at my raise request. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we both knew it. "This is inappropriate," I said, maintaining distance while fishing for my car keys. "You've put 220 jobs at risk," he said, his voice urgent and desperate. "TechFlow is facing an existential crisis because of the intellectual property you took." "I didn't take anything that belonged to TechFlow," I replied calmly. "I took my personal intellectual property that TechFlow used without proper acquisition. Your legal team never did their due diligence, and you never valued experienced personnel enough to care about the details." Preston stepped closer, desperation evident in his bloodshot eyes. He'd probably been working 18-hour days trying to contain the damage. "Name your price. Whatever CloudVault is paying, we'll double it. Triple it. We'll make you CTO, give you equity, whatever you want." I thought about those 16 years sitting in that cubicle while he collected bonuses for my work. About the morning he'd dismissed me like obsolete hardware. About my family's medical bills and my children's educational dreams that his 12% refusal had jeopardized. "You once told me to think seriously about golf courses," I said quietly. "I'm just following your succession planning philosophy." The following quarter, TechFlow's stock fell 52%. They laid off 220 employees in 2 waves, targeting senior staff with the highest salaries first. The tech media described it as a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and mysterious deterioration of their award-winning security systems. Industry analysts wrote case studies about the dangers of undervaluing experienced talent in competitive markets. Preston resigned under pressure from the board after their stock hit a 4-year low. His replacement was a 57-year-old former Cisco executive who immediately began trying to poach senior engineers from competitors. Too late. The damage to TechFlow's reputation in the engineering community was irreversible. Then came the inevitable lawsuit. TechFlow sued me for theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their case collapsed spectacularly when my documentation proved conclusively that I had developed the core algorithms as personal projects. The judge not only dismissed their claims, but awarded me legal fees, noting that TechFlow had failed to secure proper ownership of innovations they'd implemented. But victory felt more complex than I'd expected. 4 months after the lawsuit ended, Paige Anderson, TechFlow's former head of customer service, visited my office. She'd been with the company for 12 years before the layoffs, someone I'd shared coffee with and complained about management decisions alongside. 220 people lost their jobs, Hunter, she said, sitting across from my desk. People with families, mortgages, kids in college. Was your revenge worth destroying their livelihoods? The question hit harder than any lawsuit. I'd focused so intently on Preston's arrogance that I'd underestimated the collateral damage. "You're right to be angry," I said. "That's why CloudVault has hired 73 former TechFlow employees in the last 5 months, including everyone from your customer service team who wanted to join us." Paige's expression softened slightly. "And the others, the ones who can't relocate, who are too specialized, who are close to retirement." That conversation led to the creation of Experience Matters, CloudVault's formal initiative targeting displaced senior professionals industry-wide. We partnered with 3 retraining organizations to offer skills updates for engineers over 45. We created consulting opportunities for near-retirement professionals who wanted flexible arrangements. We became the first major tech company to explicitly reject age bias in hiring. The program became a model for Silicon Valley. Other companies began questioning their own youth-obsessed hiring practices. Within a year, applications to our open positions increased 400%, with experienced professionals specifically seeking out companies that valued their expertise over their energy levels. 8 months after leaving TechFlow, I received the IEEE Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to cloud security architecture. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience full of gray-haired engineers and young developers working together, I thought about Preston's comment regarding golf courses. He'd been wrong about everything. We weren't expensive, legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. We were battle-tested professionals who understood the difference between moving fast and building systems that actually work long-term. When you combine decades of hard-won experience with the motivation to prove doubters wrong, you create something pretty unstoppable. A year later, TechFlow made headlines again, declaring bankruptcy and selling their assets to a private equity firm. The company I'd helped build from 60 employees to 2,200 was gone, dismantled by leadership that confused energy with competence, disruption with innovation. Last month, Brooks' latest scan came back clean. Sierra got accepted to Harvard Medical School with a full scholarship. Colton received early admission to MYT's engineering program with financial aid covering 80% of tuition. Looking back, I realized Preston's laughter that morning was the best thing that ever happened to my career. It forced me to stop accepting less than I was worth and start fighting for what I'd built. If you're reading this and you're over 45, dealing with managers who think your experience is expensive rather than valuable, remember something. Your knowledge isn't just worth defending, it's worth fighting for. Document your work. Understand your legal rights. Never let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to become invisible. Age isn't a weakness in tech. It's wisdom waiting to be unleashed. And when experience finally demands the respect it deserves, entire industries change. The algorithms are still running, my name is on the patents, and somewhere in Silicon Valley, a young CEO is learning that loyalty is a two-way street. And when it breaks, experience always remembers how to rebuild. Age discrimination isn't just about losing one job. It's about an entire industry forgetting that the systems they depend on were built by the people they're so eager to replace.